Hi, and welcome to the Literary Hype podcast. I am Stephanie, the Literary Hype Woman, and today's author conversation is special because I've never had a Pulitzer Prize winner on the show before. So today is a first, and that Pulitzer Prize winner is Jane Smiley. This is her most recent book, Lucky, which a lot of it is set in St. Louis. It's about a girl who grew up in St. Louis and kind of grows up to be a musician. So it was fitting that her book tour came here and that we got to sit down and talk at a park outside and enjoy the St. Louis spring. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Jane Smiley. Welcome to Literary Hype. It's very exciting to have you on.
Thank you very much.
Because I've never had a Pulitzer Prize winner on before. So of course we have to start talking about that, even though it's been a minute or two since that happened.
It has been.
That was back in 1992. Mm-hmm. What did you learn from that whole process of winning a Pulitzer that has helped you with your writing through your career over the last 30 years?
That your children don't care.
Really?
No, I'm just making a joke. One of my children was home from school. I think she was ill or something. And when I got on the phone and then I got off the phone with somebody who was talking to me, I turned to her and I said, "Honey, I think I won the Pulitzer Prize." And she looked at me and said, "Huh."
Kids don't care what their parents do. They're just their parent.
I mean, yeah, that's exactly right. What did I learn from winning the Pulitzer Prize? Well, I was already involved in my next book, so I didn't learn about, let's say, what am I going to write next. But it definitely was a pleasure, and my advances popped up, and that was good. But I've always done things my way, and that Pulitzer Prize was a way of them saying, well, your way's pretty good.
You've also been a judge for other awards in the literary space. What did that teach you, so moving forward as a judge, that you knew to help critique other writers' works?
Well, I remember when I was judging the Man Booker International Prize, which was a Lifetime Achievement Award, basically, with all kinds of writers who, most of whom wrote in English or their books were in translation. The long list was really long. And so I was the head of the committee. And the first thing we did when we got together the first time was I said, we're going to have 3 rounds of not, or maybe it was 5, not in my lifetime. And we could each name a writer that we wouldn't give the prize to. And that was a good thing, because that meant that we had no conflict. When we eventually gave it to Alice Munro, we all agreed, and nobody was pushing for someone who the other, or one or the other people, one or somebody didn't like. Subsequently, they used to not give that. They used to give that award out maybe every 3 years. I can't even remember now. But subsequently, they gave an award out, and there was a big disagreement, and they gave it to somebody, and one of the members on the committee said that she had was totally against it in public. So yeah, that's what I learned about judging. And you have to have agreeable fellow judges, and you have to be willing to read. But it was fun. I enjoyed it.
It sounds like a fun little task. Oh, I get to read all day, darn. And speaking of reading, your brand new book, Lucky. Mm-hmm. For anybody who hasn't seen it already on their social media or Goodreads feeds, tell us a little bit about what this book is.
Well, Lucky is, I grew up in St. Louis, where we are now, and in 2017, when I was visiting, one of the newspaper guys said, "Have you ever set a book in St. Louis?" And I thought about it. I said, "No, I haven't." And I thought what I would like to do would be to set a book in St. Louis. And since I've always loved music, it occurred to me to have it be about a woman my age who becomes a musician rather than a writer. And it was really fun. I enjoyed writing it a lot. Came back to St. Louis several times to look around. Gave her a different life from mine, but with some similarities. And I just felt at the end that she was kind of like my friend, you know. It was fun.
St. Louis is basically a character in this book.
Yes.
You are very detailed in your descriptions of neighborhoods and locations and streets and all of that. So you came back and visited. Did you also rely on maps to fit that time period or your memory?
Well, I relied on my memory for the time periods, but she lives here longer than I did. So I use Google Maps all the time to have the Google boy run around and show me various places. And that was very helpful. But I also visited and came back, and you know, I looked, if I wanted her to go to a restaurant, I would look at which ones were characteristically St. Louis restaurants, like Schneidhorst or Gito's on the Hill or something like that. I also wanted to use as many totally weird street names as I possibly could. So,
there are many here.
There are. And
no one knows how to pronounce them correctly.
Well, it was really fun. I mean, I spent part of my youth in Creve Coeur, and I could never imagine why they would name a prosperous suburb Broken Heart.
I did look that up when I first moved out here. It was like, what does that even mean? Because it's such a weird word.
Yeah.
And was very surprised. I'm like, okay. What was it about St. Louis that made you want to set the book, a good chunk of that book here?
Well, it's an extremely interesting town. It's got a very interesting history. It's all of the various neighborhoods are different from one another, and they're also close to one another. So, you know, you'll be in some place like Huntley, and you'll be sort of gasping at the mansions, and then boom, you're in a regular old middle-class town where there's a shack here, a shack there. And I wanted my characters to live in the different parts of town. So one of them lives in Kirkwood on Argonne, one of them lives in Webster on Clark. Jody, the main character, she grows up on Skinker. You know, that's one of the things I've always enjoyed about St. Louis, is that you're here and then you're here and then you're here, and each place is slightly different from the other places. And, you know, we all know this, but when somebody finds out you're from St. Louis, the first thing they ask you is,
where'd you go to high school?
Yeah.
It's real.
It's real. And that's because all the neighborhoods are different, all the schools are different, and you learn something about that person when they say, well, I went to Webster High, or I went to Chaminade, but also the names of the schools are fun, you know, like Chaminade, that's a good one.
And if you're not from St. Louis, they're like, okay.
My older stepsister went to Villa Duchesne.
Ooh, nice.
And I always loved the French quality to some of the names of the towns and the schools and stuff like that. Just one of the thing that strikes me right now, sitting in this park and being in St. Louis at this time of year, is how drop-dead gorgeous the trees are, the grass, it's so green, and you know, the landscape varies all over town and then down toward the Ozarks and everything, and it just reminds me of what a great place it was to grow up.
This book starts out at the horse races.
Cahokia Downs, yeah.
Yeah, which William Shatner, when he was in town, that was like all he wanted to talk about, how he used to come to the horse races here. So it tickled me to see that as being the first little bit. And so like,
well, let me tell you a story about that.
Okay.
So when I was growing up here, I was totally dedicated to horses. And there was a guy who had a stable on, cannot remember the name of the street, but people would remember it. Maybe that was the Countryside Lane Street. His name was Otis Brown, and it was called Otis Brown Stables. And when I got a horse, I kept her there. And I learned a lot. He was really good, but he also took us to the races because his stable wintered racehorses over between the seasons. And so one of the things he would do with us when in the middle of the winter and the horses had to be moved was he'd throw us on them to just walk them around the barn. And I kept my horse there, and one of my favorite things to do, there was a trail that ran along the back of Countryside Lane. That was great. There was a convent right across from the barn, and some of the young girls who had just gotten into the convent, they would come running up the hill so that they could have a look at the horses. It was totally fascinating.
So our main character, Jody, wins a bet at a horse race and gets this wad of $2 bills that is now her like lucky charm for her life.
Yeah.
How did you go about deciding what her lucky charm was going to be? Was there a specific
that just jumped
moment?
into my mind. That was almost my first idea with regard to the book, because I liked going over to Cahokia Downs. I never placed a bet like that, but or neither did anybody I knew place a winning bet. But I loved watching the races, and I thought, well, if you what's the most unusual way of being lucky? Well, it's one of them is winning a trifecta at a race. And she doesn't know what's going on. Her uncle just hands her a piece of paper and has her circle three numbers, and she doesn't even know what's going on. But it's amazing to her that she now has these $2 bills all in a roll.
I feel like she got gypped on that a little bit because he had so much more money out of that bet.
Oh, but he's very kind to her for the rest of her life, and
it's true.
He doesn't really want the other members of the family to know where he took her.
It's true.
So,
a little hush money for the child.
Hush money, yeah.
So this book has a lot to do with the St. Louis music scene. A lot of names get mentioned in here. What was the research process for you like in diving into St. Louis music history?
Well, it's not hard.
It's really not. There's a whole exhibit at the History Museum.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. We all knew about it when I was growing up. We didn't know every single name, but we knew some of their names. And so that gave us a sense that St. Louis was very rich in music. And then there was the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, there were all and the Muni Opera. So there were all kinds of exposures to music.
And along with the music, there are some lyrics. You're very detailed in describing music. Was it a challenge to write the lyric side versus prose, or was there a different approach to how you handled
it? I expected it to be, but it wasn't. The ideas would come to me from what I was writing, and I would just try it out and see. And I was surprised at how much I enjoyed that part.
This book deals a lot with the themes of family and wealth and ambition, just like 1,000 Acres.
Yeah.
What is it about those topics that really attracts you and spurs your creativity?
I came from a very diverse family in terms of financial, what's the word? Just in terms of finance. Sometimes they were just scraping by. Sometimes they were doing well because my grandfather worked at the International Shoe Tannery, and they paid him well. But they had started out, my grandmother and my grandfather had started out together in Idaho. And my grandfather's brother was the problem. He got into some kind of trouble in Montgomery County. I don't know what it was, but they did. And so his mom bought him a ranch to get out of town, and it was in Idaho, I guess because it was probably cheap. And my grandfather, who was his younger brother, was to go along and help him get used to the ranch. But my grandfather essentially became the boss of the ranch because the brother didn't really care much about it. My grandmother was born in Idaho. She loved Idaho. She became a school teacher in the town where my grandfather's ranch was. And they had to find they didn't have any home for her, so they had to find a place where she could be put up. And it ended up being the ranch because my grandfather lived there, but there was also another woman who lived there who was his maid. And so my grandmother lived there, and my grandfather fell in love with her, and she fell in love with him and the ranch, and they thought their life was set. And then the older brother offered up the deed to the ranch in a poker game and lost the ranch. And that's how they ended up back in St. Louis. So that was always an interesting family story. That my family, being the way it is, made it sound funny. But obviously, when you think back on it, you think, wow, what a shock that must have been.
This book reads kind of like an older person just kind of telling their story to somebody that's close to them. How did you capture Jodi's voice to make it feel so close to
I have no idea. I just thought about her and thought about her and thought about her, gave her that first episode, and just kept going.
Do you have any techniques or methods that you've kind of honed in over your decades of writing to help you really dive in?
Research, 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 research. Even stuff that you think you know about. You have to find out more details than you know, because the details that you don't know, those are the ones that are more stimulating than the details that you do know. And so, and fortunately, it's changed over the course of my career. Now you can do a lot of research online, though I do believe in going places and checking them out and walking around and looking at the place where the book is set. But it's not quite as difficult to find information as it once was. But it's still important. It's still important, and you can't not do it.
You've written 30-ish books at this point.
Yeah, 33. That's wow. The number I've published.
33. That is a lot. What do you wish you knew back when you were writing book one that you know now?
Nothing, because I want book one for everybody to come out of the person the way they think it should, because you have to have been kind of ignorant in order to learn stuff. And I learned plenty of stuff from writing book one that I didn't realize was going to be a problem or that was going to be a pleasure. So I'm fine with book one for me, and book two, and it was fine.
Do you have any advice to young writers as they're trying to get started on their journey?
Well, I wrote a book called 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel, and it's about me in the sort of mid part of my career deciding to read a bunch of novels, ones that I hadn't read and ones that I had read, in order to A, distract myself from 9/11, and B, learn more about the history of literature. So I read 100 novels, starting with The Tale of Genji, that was from about the year 1000 and going up to 2000. And I learned a lot from reading the novels. So I wrote an analysis of the nature of the novel, the history of the novel. And then I also wrote 2 chapters called A Novel of Your Own Part 1 and A Novel of Your Own Part 2. And what I learned about that I put in A Novel of Your Own Part 1 is you just have to keep going, and no matter what you stick in there, you just have to do it because you want to get to the end. And one of the things I said in that chapter was that every first draft is perfect because it never existed before. Then there's a chapter about how you rewrite it. And then there's suggestions in there about reading it, understanding what's missing, understanding what maybe you wrote too much of. You have to rewrite it. You have to sort it out. You have to make it different from the first draft. Sometimes you have to make it more elaborate so that the reader can understand it better or picture the setting better. But other times you realize you've been repetitive and you have to cut it. And that was helpful for me too. I learned a lot just from reading all those novels and writing out those instructions. And it was fun.
Banned books are a big conversation nowadays. You've had a book banned. As someone
Not
who's
nearly enough. It's a banned book can be the one that makes the most money.
It's true. But from your lens, as someone who's had a book banned and like the world we're living in, just kind of touch on why this is such an important conversation about how we're handling that restriction.
Well, I think the point of view I would like to go from is that when I was young, I wasn't told not to read this or not to read that. I was allowed to read whatever I wanted. And I learned stuff, even if I didn't quite understand it, I learned stuff from all of them. And that's what I think is true of all kids. And I don't think, for example, they should be told not to read books that are about, I say The Color Purple. That's a banned book. Well, The Color Purple is an important book for people to read, to understand what it was like to be a black woman, you know, say 50 or 60 years ago. We all have to know that. So I don't understand why that book is banned. You know, I might understand why some sadomasochistic book would be banned from, you know, 9th grade. But you know the kids are going to go look for it anyway. As soon as you've said it's forbidden, that's where they're headed. Especially the smart ones. The smart ones are the ones that want to know more. And if you tell them they can't know that, then they want it even more. So, you know, I think it's not that I don't think there should be banned books. It's that I think banning books is pointless. And so why bother?
Whenever there's a book banned, the sales tend to jump up on that, because everyone's like, oh well, if it's banned, then I want to know why.
Yeah, exactly.
And since this is Literary Hype, what books are you hyped about right now?
I'm reading a book that's a part of the Flashman series. I'm surprised those aren't banned because they're comic novels. A British man wrote them, and I always forget his name. He has three parts to his name. I can look it up and let you know, but he takes the main character from Tom Brown's Schoolboys, and the main character is the guy who was the bad boy in Tom Brown's School Days, Tom Brown's School Days, and sends this guy out on a trip around the world, essentially, because he goes everywhere. And he always wants to be a total jerk, and then he always ends up doing something noble. And it's a fascinating series because it's very funny, but it's full of contradictions. And you say, why do I like this guy? But then you're sort of drawn into him. And you're drawn into him. And I think it's totally fascinating. I've really liked it all along. Fraser is his last name. He died a few years ago, and I wrote a little bit for him, for the Guardian.
Thank you so much for taking time to hang out at the park with me and talk about books.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Jane for taking time while she was out on her book tour to sit down with me at a park in St. Louis to talk about her St. Louis-based book, Lucky. If you'd like to get a copy of this book or any of her other books, the links to do so are down in the description for you. And while you're that side of the video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already, and share this with your friends. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.